All right, so we have our basic form set up. You can type in an email, a password, and a password confirmation, but there's a lot of things missing here, and the big one is validation. So this password and password confirmation doesn't mean anything, and you could leave anything blank, and obviously that's not what we want. So let's tackle validation. How do we do validation in Livewire? So right here, this user create inside of our register method, this should feel very similar to a controller. Like if you were writing a form, a registration form that's submitted to an endpoint, you would have a controller where you'd call user create. So think about what you would do if you were in a controller context, and then we'll kind of work backwards to how you do it in Livewire. So in Laravel, in a normal controller, you would do something like this. Request arrow validate. You would add your validation, something like email is required, right? And then maybe you get all the data out of that. So this is pretty cool that the validate method validates the data. If it's invalid, it'll throw an exception and just throw a fit and do whatever it does. If it passes, it'll give you all the data that you specified. So it's clean data, it's safe data. So you have data, and then in user create, you would do something like this. Data, email, and this would be data, password. Okay. Now in Livewire, you don't have access to the request, or you actually do, but it's not what you think. The data that we're interested in does not live in the request. It lives on these properties. That's how Livewire works. Instead of thinking of Livewire from request to request like you do in Laravel, you think about it in terms of data and data binding and things like that. It's kind of how you treat it in Vue.js. But I really like all the idioms from Laravel controllers, and I want to leverage as much familiarity as I can. So in Livewire, you just do this arrow validate, and it has the same exact effect. Anything you can pass to request arrow validate, you can pass to this arrow validate, and it should feel completely in line with what you're used to in Laravel. So this actually works. We could try it. Let's look at table plus and see that we only have 2 in here. We can get rid of these. Okay, and now if I hit register, we're not going to see anything because we didn't add registration values, but I refresh and nothing is there, so it did not work. Registration failed, and it threw a validation exception, just the same way that Laravel would. So to keep even further with parity between Laravel and Livewire, what do we do for showing validation messages in the template? So if you're used to just Laravel and Blade, you would do something like this. If, let's say, errors, if errors any, right? And then like, or has email, something like that. And then you would echo out like errors first email or something like that. Or maybe you even use the helper. I think I PR'd this a while back, and I think some people love it and some people hate it. Hopefully you love it. If you hate it, don't tell me. Message. Okay. So you do something like this, a one-liner. Error, if there's an error, display the message. Well, in Livewire, it's the same exact thing. When Livewire encounters a validation exception, it passes the same message bag that Laravel does into the view. So all of this code works perfectly. So we could do this. Perfect. And now, if we refresh our page, we hit enter, we get a validation exception. The email field is required. Perfect. All right, so we are looking good and sitting pretty. Let's add some meaningful validation and make this thing work well. So email's required. We also want password to be required. Whoops. Password to be required, right? So email's required. What else? Let's keep tacking stuff on. We want it to be a valid email address. We also want it to be unique to the users table. The password we want to be required. Let's make it a minimum of 6 characters, and we want it to be the same as the password confirmation field. Okay, I think that should do it. That was straight from memory, so there's a good chance this isn't going to work. Let's try it out. We hit register, and that all makes sense. That's good. Okay, and now let's just type Caleb, and we have, it must be a valid email address. We're doing pretty well. Caleb at Gmail. I wonder who has that. Lucky duck. Now that's gone. Password, let's say sec. And it'll say must be at least 6 characters. Okay. Secret. Register. Password and password confirmation must match. Secret. register, and it worked. Now we look inside our database and we have our user. That was pretty good. All right, you don't know if I edit it between the time I said it would work and the time it actually worked. You don't know. You'll never know. Just have to trust me. Okay, so the validation works and it works well. A couple other things. We left all the input right here. Now, if this were a normal form where you create something and something live updates on the page, you could, after creating the user, you could like reset email to empty string or something like that, right? Or you could redirect to another page. In our case, it's a registration form. We probably want to redirect to another place in the application, like the homepage or something like that, right? Now, in a controller, again, think to yourself, what would you do inside a controller? You would return redirect to, or you could actually just put it right inside redirect. Return redirect to the home route, right? That's what you would do in a controller. Well, you can do this same exact thing from a Livewire component, which is pretty nifty. So before we actually do that, let's create a route endpoint for us to actually redirect to. So we'll say route get, and then, I don't know, let's just return an array that says success. That sounds good to me. Yeah, okay. So now notice I'm not actually gonna refresh this page, because if I did, I'd have to retype this all out and that would take just as long as me explaining why I'm not doing that. But in Livewire, you don't have to refresh the page all the time. In fact, very rarely do you have to refresh the page. So I'm not gonna refresh, I'm gonna hit register. It's actually going to give me a new validation message because I already created Caleb at Gmail, so it does. So let's say Caleb2, naturally, of course. Caleb2, we hit register, and now without refreshing the page, it should then redirect us to the home route where we get that success message. So let's see if it works. Fingers crossed. Register, bam, there we go. Beautiful. Really nice workflow, lots of flexibility. Let's wrap tests around it and call it a day. See you in the next video.